The sunshine and beaches of South Florida attract many types of people. Aspiring young models gravitate here with the hopes of being discovered. Beginning in February 1984, the dreams of stardom darkened into nightmares when several young women disappeared. It was the beginning of a string of brutal and terrifying murders that spread out across the country.
It's a model's job to rivet the public's attention. But in 1984, some aspiring models began attracting publicity in a terrible new way. Across the country, dreams of glamour turned nightmarish as young women disappeared, only to be found tortured and killed. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. When a suspect emerged, the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list became the tool we used to try to flush him out.
The promising life of Beth Kenyon came to a violent end on March 5th, 1984. The attractive 23-year-old dreamed of becoming a model. She had even been a finalist in the Miss Florida pageant. But all her hopes were cut short this Monday afternoon. The next day, Beth's parents reported her disappearance to the Miami police. The police merely listed Beth as a missing person and explained many girls her age drop out of sight for various reasons without telling their parents. But the Kenyons knew their daughter wasn't the type to just vanish after a few days on a lark. They hired private detective Ken Whitaker and his son Ken Jr. to investigate.
She's been missing.
The Kenyons told the Whitakers that Beth worked as a teacher of emotionally disturbed children.
She has a regular routine that she comes home.
She was responsible and enjoyed a close relationship with her family.
Strange there. This is, as you can see, where she had a 6 o'clock appointment. That she
Fearing
did not
something
show
had
up.
happened to Beth, the Kenyons had searched their daughter's apartment in North Dade County for anything that might help them find her. But all they found was an address book and a picture album.
Picture of Beth, and this is Beth over here, and this is a boyfriend, somebody she went out with.
This is just showing me a picture.
Armed with little more than a few snapshots of Beth and her friends, the investigators went to work. The father and son team quickly narrowed down Beth Kenyon's last known whereabouts. Ken Whitaker Jr. talked to an attendant at a Miami gas station near the school where Beth taught. Ken showed the attendant several photographs. He clearly remembered Beth, but he also recognized someone else in the photos, a man that accompanied Beth the afternoon she disappeared. His name was Christopher Wilder. On March 11th, 6 days after Beth's disappearance, the investigators contacted Wilder by phone. He denied knowing where Beth was, but invited the Whitakers to his house to speak more about her. But when Wilder didn't answer his door, the suspicious investigators decided to look around. They had learned he was a successful building contractor and a self-proclaimed fashion photographer. The Kenyons had told the father and son team that Wilder had proposed to their daughter, but that she had turned him down, leaving him upset and angry. Rifling through the garbage, the Whitakers found a photograph.
Chris Wilder.
On the surface, it appeared an innocent picture, but to trained eyes, it meant more. The Investigators soon learned that Christopher Wilder had driven a car in the Miami Grand Prix. On February 26, 1984, he finished 17th and won $400. That race day was also the last time that anyone saw Rosario Gonzalez. The 20-year-old worked for a marketing firm distributing free aspirin samples at the Grand Prix. The Miami news still buzzed with the mysterious disappearance of Gonzalez. She had vanished just 5 days before Beth Kenyon. The investigators discovered that Wilder knew Gonzalez. She had modeled for him in amateur photo shoots. It was a critical connection. The two missing women, Beth Kenyon and Rosario Gonzalez, were linked through Christopher Wilder. With this information, Mr. and Mrs. Kenyon sought the help of the FBI. Special Agent John Hanlon of the FBI's Violent Crimes Unit in Miami remembers the meeting.
On the 12th of March, the Kenyons came to the FBI seeking more active involvement of the FBI. Of course, we didn't have any jurisdiction at the time. There was no evidence of an abduction.
In an attempt to put pressure on Wilder, the Kenyons' private investigators leaked their findings to the Miami Herald. The story was published on March 16, 1984. Though the article did not mention Christopher Wilder's name, it clearly accused him. The report described the man connecting Gonzalez and Kenyon as a local contractor, race car driver, amateur photographer, and a native Australian. It was Wilder to a T. Although the FBI had no jurisdiction, Supervisory Special Agent Gordon McNeil had already begun looking into the matter.
This connection drew my interest, and I decided to open a preliminary kidnapping investigation to see if we had a possible violation of federal law.
Agents McNeil and Hanlon found Wilder was a likely suspect. He had a criminal history that reached back to his native Australia, where he was out on bail on a sexual assault charge. Days later, on March 21st, the agents were notified about an incident which allowed them to open a full investigation. A phone call came into the Miami FBI office reporting that a Tallahassee, Florida woman had been abducted and transported across state lines into Georgia, where she escaped. The initial description of her assailant fit Christopher Wilder.
Are you okay?
Special Agent Hanlon flew to Georgia to hear the victim's story. It was a nightmare.
Oh, sorry, no visitors.
19-year-old Linda Grober told Hanlon she'd been shopping in a mall in Tallahassee, Florida, when a man approached her about a modeling job.
Magazine covers. I got any number of them. Can it really sound like
Claiming to be a photographer, the stranger invited her back to his car to see his portfolio. It was the middle of the afternoon in a very public place, and Linda said she felt perfectly safe.
Never?
When he asked her if she'd ever modeled, she said no. He flattered her with remarks about how beautiful she was and promised he could put her on the cover of Vogue. But Linda reported that when they got to his car, the photographer began changing his story. He claimed he'd left his portfolio at his studio, and he asked Linda to go back to the studio with him. When she hesitated, the man attacked and pushed her into the car. He clubbed her on the back of her head. Everything just went black. When she regained consciousness, they were driving on a country road. When her abductors saw her coming around, he stopped the car in a secluded spot. He dragged Linda from the car, telling her that if she tried to escape, he would kill her. He wrapped his fingers around her throat and strangled her until she passed out. The next time she woke up, she was wrapped in a sleeping bag, lying on a bed in a cheap motel room. Once again, he threatened to kill her if she tried to escape.
Don't move.
He tied her to the bed and superglued her eyes shut. For the next several hours, the kidnapper repeatedly raped, beat, and tortured Linda Grober. When she disobeyed his commands, he shocked her with an extension cord he had fashioned into an electrocution device.
And he tied
The
me
abuse
up.
was so severe, Linda realized she would be dead before someone found her.
And then we drove through.
She managed to break free and locked herself in the bathroom.
Somebody help! Help!
She pounded on the walls and screamed for help.
Help me!
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Hey! Stop now! Stop it! Stop it! I'm telling you!
The rapist panicked, grabbed what he could, and ran. Agent Hanlon showed Grober a series of photos and asked if she could identify her assailant.
It was absolutely no doubt in my mind. I mean, I'd spent hours with this person that's who he was. And I just identified him as clearly Christopher Wilder.
Now 35, a PhD candidate and a single mom, Linda Grober's fierce determination saved her life. It also made her a strong witness, ready to risk everything for her abuser's arrest.
I was in the hospital for a week or something like that, and then I had to basically leave the country while he was still a fugitive because they were concerned about my safety. They were concerned about my family's safety.
As heinous as Grober's ordeal was, it had the value of catapulting the investigation into a federal case. Because she had been abducted across a state line, the FBI now had full jurisdiction. Christopher Wilder was now wanted for the kidnapping and rape of Linda Grober. And he remained the prime suspect in the disappearance of Rosario Gonzalez and Beth Kenyon.
Obviously now we had federal violation, and we had every reason to put all the resources of the FBI into this case.
Not knowing exactly where to find Wilder, a team of agents descended upon his house in full force. Kicking in the door, they poured in, ready to arrest the suspect.
Clear! Clear!
But they found an empty house.
Clear! Everything clear?
All clear, all clear.
Wilder had long abandoned it.
All clear.
He was on the run, days ahead of the federal agents. And every minute he remained free put another woman in jeopardy. The desperate chase had begun. March 1984. FBI agents conducted a meticulous search of the abandoned home belonging to Christopher Wilder. 2 women were missing and presumed dead at his hands. A third had barely escaped with her life after her kidnapping and rape. The agents needed something to clue them in to their suspect's present whereabouts.
You like to decorate it?
But before he left, Wilder had prepared his home for any investigator.
The place had been manicured. There were basically no fingerprints left in Wilder's house. You're always going to find fingerprints inside a residence. It looked like everything had been totally cleaned.
FBI and local authorities canvassed Miami and West Palm Beach. But no one reported having seen or heard from Wilder since he left Linda Grober in a Georgia motel. The FBI alerted police to keep an eye out for Wilder's car. They asked banks and credit card companies to monitor any transactions he might make. But informational systems in 1984 moved slowly. The leads trickled in and were usually too late for a quick response. On March 21st, 1984, a sharp-eyed utility repairman in Central Florida noticed something unusual in a shallow creek. It was the barely recognizable body of a young woman. She was later identified as 21-year-old Teresa Ferguson. Witnesses last saw her 3 days earlier, leaving a shopping mall with a man fitting Wilder's description. The autopsy showed she'd been beaten with a tire iron and strangled to death. The victim's profile and the savagery of the crime suggested Wilder. But nothing directly tied him to it. If it was the Australian contractor, the FBI agents knew they had a serial killer on the loose. One that had to be stopped before he murdered again. Agents continued to follow the suspect's trail. An automatic security camera photographed Wilder at a bank in Tampa. The bank records showed that he had emptied his accounts of more than $19,000. It was an ominous break. Their prey now had the money to travel far and wide. By March 22nd, 1984, Wilder was already in Texas. Witnesses saw him approach 23-year-old Terry Walden in the parking lot of Lamar University in Beaumont, Texas. Walden was a wife, mother of 2, and a nursing student.
Yes, I'm a photographer. My job is to know.
Wilder asked her if she'd like to do some modeling.
Make a lot of extra money. You sure you don't want to keep the card and think about it?
But Wilder couldn't seduce Walden with his pitch.
Okay.
She politely declined. She had no way of knowing that she would soon see him again. While the FBI began its national hunt, witnesses later told investigators that Wilder had stayed in Beaumont, Texas another day. This time he went back to familiar territory to stalk his next victim.
They have this one is $7.99 or $9.99.
He visited the local mall, shopping for a young woman to deceive with dreams of glamour.
You're taking some fashion photography? No, listen. You don't have to blind me. I'm legit. It's okay.
But no one succumbed to his bogus promises.
No, sorry.
That's fine. That's fine.
After getting brushed off several times, he spotted a familiar face. It was Terry Walden.
Hey, hi.
She had come to run
I saw you
errands after
yesterday.
dropping her 4-year-old daughter off at daycare.
Are you interested now? Will you take the card and just consider?
Terry again turned Wilder down.
No. I'm sure you could.
But this time, he wouldn't take no for an answer. As she left the mall, Wilder followed her out to her car. In broad daylight, in the middle of a crowded mall parking lot, Wilder attacked Walden. He knocked her unconscious and pushed her into her Mercury Cougar. He grabbed his bags and drove off in the victim's car. Walden's husband reported her missing later that afternoon when she failed to pick up her daughter at daycare. But by then, it was too late. Terry Walden's body was found floating in a canal near Beaumont, Texas, a few days later. The police recovered Wilder's Chrysler a few miles away.
Some fiber and some hair in here. Let's get a couple pictures of this, Jim, before we take the stuff out.
An FBI forensics search of the car uncovered hair and fibers matching Teresa Ferguson, the young woman discovered by the repairman 5 days before. It confirmed what the agents had suspected all along. Teresa Ferguson had been Wilder's fourth known victim.
Get on the floor, bro.
McNeil and Hanlon estimated that the killer was still at least 2 days ahead of them. Out of the Miami office, they broadcast a national all-points bulletin for Terry Walden's stolen car.
Every state police agency along the way, every state trooper who was out on that highway knew the car we were looking for. And unfortunately, it's amazing sometimes you say, okay, well, he's in a purple car. We say, how many purple cars are out there? Well, it's amazing how many purple cars are out there when you're looking for purple cars. And that was the problem. We never knew at the time what license plate he was using on that particular vehicle.
FBI teletypes clattered endlessly. Every field office in the country received page after page describing Wilder's physical appearance, his victim profiles, where he had last been identified, and where he was thought to be heading. The technology of 1984, however, could not keep up with the pace of his flight.
There were so many leads on Wilder going back and forth all over the country. Every one of them went to all FBI offices for information that the FBI teletype system was backed up over 48 hours for about 2 weeks because of the volume of information that was flowing back and forth on Wilder.
That left the Bureau with only one certain way to track Wilder. They had to follow the grisly trail of corpses he discarded as he ran. The next victim was 21-year-old Suzanne Logan. She was last seen shopping at a mall near Oklahoma City. A fisherman stumbled upon her body 2 days after she disappeared. The location of her disappearance and the manner in which she died all suggested one thing. She had died at the hands of Christopher Wilder.
In this particular case, we had an individual who was kidnapping, raping, torturing, and murdering a woman about every day and a half. So there was intense pressure, as there should be.
Slow technology and a fast fugitive hampered the FBI. But on March 28th, they got the break they had hoped for. Wilder checked into a motel in Rifle, Colorado, using a stolen Visa card. The FBI knew he had the card and was using it, but they had not been able to trace it until Rifle.
In those days, 1984, they didn't have the instant validation of your credit card when you walk into a hotel. They only called in bills that were going to exceed $100. Every motel that Wilder stayed along his murderous route, the charges were in the vicinity of $50 to $60.
Perhaps from sheer boredom, the motel clerk decided to call in the credit card that night instead of waiting to mail it the next day. Instead of approval, the clerk received a phone number to call immediately. An early morning call mobilized the FBI's Denver, Colorado field office. At last, the FBI knew where the fugitive
Agent
was.
for Colorado.
In the early hours of the morning of March 29th, 4 agents approached Wilder's motel room, confident that they had finally cornered the killer.
Okay. FBI! Search warrant! Go! FBI!
He wasn't there. As swiftly as the FBI had responded, Wilder had eluded them. For some unknown reason, the fugitive had departed before sunrise.
He's not in the hotel.
It had been the best lead the agency had, and it failed. Once again, the exasperated task force had no idea of where the predator was. Yet they feared it was one of the dozens of shopping malls within a day's drive of Rifle, Colorado. March 29th, 1984. In just 3 weeks, the Australian contractor Christopher Wilder had abducted 4 women and murdered 3 of them. FBI agents noticed a pattern developing in the campaign of violence. The killer kept his direction westward, and he had narrowed his hunting grounds to shopping malls. "18-year-old Cheryl Bonaventura was last seen at the Mesa Shopping Mall in Grand Junction, Colorado. The FBI would later connect Wilder to her death.
You had a man that you knew was on the prowl. You had a man who you knew as each day goes by that some poor soul in deathly fear of her life was dying in an extremely extremely painful way.
To get the word out, the FBI cast a wide net. Across the country, agents notified security officers and mall managers about the danger, telling them to be on the lookout for the Australian. Investigators supplied malls with photos and flyers that were posted to alert shoppers. Despite the FBI warnings, a teen magazine held a cover girl competition at the Meadows Mall in Las Vegas. Wilder showed up, armed with his camera. He chatted with several of the teens during the event, but eventually zeroed in on Michelle Korfman. The 17-year-old had driven up the 25 miles from her family's Boulder City, Nevada home. Nervous about participating in her first model search, she had asked her friends and family to let her go alone. After a few minutes' conversation with Wilder, Korfman changed her clothes and left the mall with him.
Yeah, sure, I do.
That's great.
It was April 1st. As soon as Vegas authorities alerted the FBI that a local girl had disappeared at a mall, agents responded. They asked for all pictures that anyone had taken of the fashion show. One photographer immediately delivered 5 rolls of film.
And when they printed those photographs, there was the Korfman girl on stage in a modeling type pose, and who's directly beyond her, about 20 feet away, looking at her with what I call the look of a homicidal maniac, none other than Christopher Wilder.
Like the others, young Michelle Korfman suffered at the hands of Wilder. He bound and gagged her with duct tape. Then he beat, raped, and tortured her.
And you will see incisions in the body. They may only be 1 inch to 1.5 inches long, and they're not deep. They're done just enough to make it bleed. They were only meant to torture, not to kill, until he finally actually killed the victims. He was a brutal sexual sadist.
Prowling shopping centers and other areas.
On April 5th, 4 days after the Michelle Korfman disappearance, the FBI held a press conference. They announced the placement of Christopher Wilder on its famed 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list.
10 Most Wanted.
For 50 years, the list has helped generate the publicity needed to catch violent fugitives.
Hey, Val.
Special Agent Tron Brecky serves as national spokesman for the FBI.
Okay, thank you.
The criteria for the top 10 was met with Wilder. He was a menace to society. He was extremely dangerous, a violent individual on whom charges were outstanding, and he had fled the area where we thought that he might be. Therefore, it was very important for us to get the message out to the American public and to the media that he could be anywhere in the United States.
But Wilder's addition to the 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list came a day too late for Tina Marie Risico. In Lomita, California, on the day before the press conference, the 16-year-old visited the Del Amo Fashion Center mall to apply for a summer job.
What a beautiful face she had.
The high school student wanted the work to save for a car. She met Christopher Wilder when he said that she was perfect for a modeling gig he had to shoot.
And actually, you're so perfect that I could give you $100 right here.
He gave her $100 cash and promised much more to come.
If you're right, and I know you are, I can tell you are. Do you have a few minutes to just go out and look at close your house up? Take some pictures in front of me. I say to myself, this girl is perfect.
Wilder drove Tina Marie to a nearby park. At first, everything progressed as if it were a legitimate job. He said the scenic location had perfect light for the camera.
This canopy right here, I think, is really lovely. Right?
As the shoot began, an eager Tina Marie worked to please her photographer.
Yeah, just look sort of.
When Wilder told her to smile, she did. When he told her to tilt her head, she did. And then it all turned wrong.
Now, in the car, all right?
He pointed a .357 Magnum at her face and told her to get in the car.
Quickly, quickly.
The terrified teen had no choice but to obey. Wilder brought Tina Marie Risico to a motel in San Diego. There, like all the others, he beat his teenage victim, tied her to the bed, and raped her repeatedly. Wilder cut her with his knife and electrocuted her using wires he would tie to different parts of her body. The brutality perplexed Agent Hanlon.
You say to yourself, why would anybody want to do that to anybody? To scare them so bad, to brutalize them so bad, to torture them with an electrical cord, and then kill them like a piece of trash. And that person knows they're going to be killed. I mean, up until some point, the great realization comes over that individual, I'm not going to survive this. My life's over. And these are young women.
He identifies himself as a professional photographer, commenting on a young woman's appearance and attempts to persuade her to accompany him from the area.
Just as Tina's life was about to end, a special news bulletin captured Wilder's attention.
Dangerous, and this approach may lead to his apprehension. Christopher Bernard Wilder has been placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. As you know,
It was the FBI press conference. Wilder watched in horror as his picture was plastered on television sets across the nation. The federal agents proclaimed him the most wanted fugitive in America. They held him responsible for the disappearances of 6 young women. They didn't know about the 7th victim in the hotel room with him.
We want to get the information out as quickly as possible.
We gotta move, come on.
Wilder panicked. He grabbed Tina Marie and hit the road.
Come on, we gotta move.
But now that he was top on the 10 most wanted fugitives list, Wilder landed on the front page of every newspaper and on the top of every newscast in the country.
It's the front page headline in every newspaper in America. Every news show, every radio show is talking about Christopher Wilder and showing his picture and saying his name, Christopher Wilder.
The FBI hoped that by plastering Wilder's face across TV screens and newspapers, someone, somewhere, would spot him. It was the best chance agents had to stop Wilder before he destroyed another life. In the spring of 1984, the FBI conducted the largest manhunt in history for the rapist and murderer, Christopher Wilder. They knew of at least 6 victims. They suspected there were many more. Wilder had squeezed through the FBI net in Nevada as he headed back east. With him was a 16-year-old hostage named Tina Marie Rosico. On April 10, 1984, outside a shopping mall in Gary, Indiana, Christopher Wilder told Rosico that he would let her go on one condition. She had to help him catch his next victim. For 6 days, the adolescent had been raped, beaten, and terrorized. She was ready to do whatever he asked. Wilder noticed Dawnette Wilt ducking into several shops. He figured she was job hunting in the mall. Rosico told Dawnette that Wilder was a store manager and wanted her to fill out a job application at his car. When they reached his car, Wilder drew his pistol and forced Dawnette to get in.
Sweetheart, why don't you just come with us? Get the car. Get in. Go around, go around.
He sped off with the 2 girls. Witnesses saw them leave.
A young woman, very attractive, as were all of Wilder's victims, had been taken from was seen leaving with an individual who they believed to be Christopher Wilder from a mall in the Indianapolis area. And so when that information came to us, we felt that, okay, now we know he's headed back east.
The Bureau directed every agent east of the Mississippi to work on the case. Despite his promise, Wilder refused to release Tina Marie. Instead, he forced Rosico to watch while he tortured and raped Dawnette in front of her. The nightmare continued for 2 days. On the morning of April 12, 1984, Tina Marie heard a familiar voice on the morning news.
Any kind of energy, and just put Tina come home alive safely. You know, we're all rooting for you.
The word that we've got
on national television, Tina Marie's mother begged the kidnapper not to hurt her daughter.
Your daughter, and that there is every indication that your daughter is still alive. And
Wilder flew into another panic. He packed up his hostages and left.
Get her dressed and you get dressed. Now.
Wilder complained that it was only a matter of time before the FBI caught up with him. He stopped the car in a wooded area near Penn Yan, New York. He ordered Rosico not to move. Dawnette was drugged with sleeping pills, yet he forced her to march into the forest. Left alone, Tina Marie pondered the opportunity to escape. But the horror of the last 9 days had broken her mentally. She stayed put. Walking through the woods, Dawnette Wilt slowly woke up to the realization that Wilder was going to kill her. She didn't want to die by stabbing. She begged him to shoot her instead. Ignoring her pleas, Wilder stabbed her through the chest twice and left her for dead.
Okay, here we go.
As he began to drive away, the fear that Dawnette Wilt might still be alive seized him. He returned to the scene to properly dispose of Dawnette.
You stay here. You stay here, you hear?
When he got there, he could scarcely believe what he saw. She was gone. Incredibly, Dawnette Wilt had survived. Stabbed twice, bleeding profusely, drugged and beaten, she had managed to pull herself up and escape to a road where a passing motorist rescued her. Thanks to Wilt's testimony, the FBI now pinned Wilder in the Northeast, still driving the Mercury Cougar he had stolen from Terry Walden. But for how long?
After he went back and found out that she was no longer there, he realized obviously that he had to do something with this vehicle. He needed a new vehicle. And he got into western New York State.
Once again, he headed for the nearest mall. This time in Victor, New York, where he spotted a gold Pontiac Firebird. He told Rosico she would take the wheel of the Cougar and follow him wherever he went. He carjacked 33-year-old Beth Dodge. At gunpoint, Wilder forced her into the back seat of her Firebird. The emotionally shattered Tina Marie did as she was ordered. Wilder drove for a half an hour to a secluded area.
Come on, get out. Come on, just get out. Just get out. Listen, I want you to get the white suitcase, and I want you to get the camera, and I want you to put it in this car and wait for me, you understand?
He forced Beth Dodge into the woods. Moments later, Tina Marie heard 2 shots echo out from the trees. There had been no rape, no torture this time. Wilder had simply killed Dodge for her car. But he had a different fate in mind for Tina Marie. In all the hell he had put her through, Wilder had bonded with Tina Marie. He told her he didn't want her to be around when the end came. He drove Tina Marie Rosico to the airport in Boston and gave her money for a ticket home to Los Angeles. Her ordeal was finally over. Once safely home, Tina Marie would fill in details for agents about Wilder's murderous rampage. Wilder was now alone. And the agents didn't want to wait till another victim disappeared to clue them into his whereabouts.
During the search for Wilder, we knew that he had friends in Canada and had visited Canada extensively. So we felt there was a good chance that he was heading directly to the east and then north into Canada.
Wilder raced toward the border in Beth Dodge's Firebird. For 3 weeks, he had beaten the FBI's best efforts. Even the 10 most wanted fugitives list had failed to produce his capture. Agents McNeil and Hanlon desperately wanted to stop the killer before he struck again or fled their jurisdiction. By April 1984, Christopher Wilder had left 7 women dead across America. 3 more were presumed dead. 3 others had survived with rapes and beatings. The FBI believed that he was in New England, heading north. Federal agents concentrated their resources in the northeastern states before he could escape across the Canadian border.
I mean, the FBI had agents out circularizing in the wanted poster out and that kind of thing, but the best thing you have going for you are the hundreds of police officers up in that area who are many more eyes and ears than FBI agents available in New England.
On Friday, April 13th, 1984, Wilder stopped for gas in the tiny town of Colebrook, New Hampshire, about a dozen miles from the Canadian border. While he filled the tank, he casually asked an attendant about the paperwork that might be needed to cross the border. 2 state troopers, Wayne Fortier and Leo Jellison, spotted Beth Dodge's car. They, like almost every police department in the country, had been told to be on the lookout for the Firebird and for a man of Wilder's description. Jellison asked Wilder if he could speak with him.
Please, get out of the car!
Wilder leaped into the Firebird and grabbed his .357 Magnum. In the struggle, the weapon went off. Officer Jellison was shot in the chest. He would live. But Christopher Wilder would not. The bullet that wounded Officer Jellison first passed through Wilder. It pierced his heart, killing him instantly. Wilder's cross-country reign of terror ended with a 10th death. His own. Authorities ultimately recovered the mutilated bodies of Cheryl Bonaventura and Michelle Korfman in the months afterwards. But the 2 missing women that started the investigation, Rosario Gonzalez and Beth Kenyon, were never found. Mr. and Mrs. Kenyon went to their graves without knowing the fate of their daughter. Other victims and their loved ones have struggled to restore their shattered lives. Linda Grober has also learned a chilling lesson.
I think an important point to make is that these people are not always demons, and they don't always have tattoos, they don't always have long hair. They're often extremely eloquent, and they're disguised, and they can fit easily into your father's living room after dinner sipping a wine or a brandy.
The terrifying truth is that Christopher Wilder was not unique. He made the Most Wanted Fugitives list, but there are dozens of killers like him each year that never reach national attention. They trawl our shopping centers, our schools, and our churches, searching for victims. Vivid dreams of easy fame and fortune can quickly darken. Only through public awareness, tireless vigilance, and the resourcefulness of the FBI can we hope to keep these predators at bay. A pair of serial killers roamed the Midwest, preying on adults and children alike. Always a step behind, agents had no choice but to follow the trail of bodies. As the crime spree raged out of control, Pressure mounted to stop these killers.
They swept through 6 states like a plague, thrill killers acting without rhyme or reason. They targeted adults and young girls, kidnapping, murdering, then moving on to kill again. And in their rampage, they left plenty of clues. But moving targets are the hardest to hit. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The hunt was on for these killers with a knack for eluding authorities. We hoped a nationwide dragnet would bring them to justice.
In Kenosha, Wisconsin, a community close to the Illinois border, single mother Juanita Wheat arrived home with her 9-year-old daughter Vernita and their new friend Robert Knight. It was getting late on the evening of May 29, 1984, when they returned from a day of fun at a local carnival. Robert told Juanita that he had a belated Mother's Day present for her at his place just a few blocks away. He asked if Vernita could help him carry it back. He promised it would only take an hour. Reluctant at first, Juanita gave in to her daughter's excited pleas.
All right. Be goodbye, baby. All right, we'll be right back. Take care, mommy. I will.
As it approached midnight, Robert and Vernita had not yet returned. Juanita was anxious about leaving her apartment to look for her daughter. If Vernita arrived to an empty home, the young girl might panic. But the worry became too great. Juanita decided to go and find her daughter. She went to the address Robert had given her. When she arrived, her panic melted into horror. The building that Robert Knight claimed was his home was abandoned. Not knowing where else to turn, Juanita went to her friend Ellen Reeves for help. Concerned for the safety of her friend's daughter, Ellen insisted it was time to contact the police. Juanita told the officer that her happy, outgoing daughter would not have run away. The officer's focus turned to Robert Knight. Juanita said she had met Robert a month earlier. He introduced himself while riding through the neighborhood on his bike. They had become friendly, and Robert had become fond of young Vernita. The police didn't have a Robert Knight on record. The officer asked Juanita to check mugshots for anyone who might look like him. Juanita scanned 2 books of photos. Finally, she pointed to a picture of a man she was sure was Robert Knight. Officers determined that the person Juanita had identified as Robert Knight was really named Alton Coleman. Investigators called the FBI. Special Agent Verdina Passanelli of the FBI's Kenosha, Wisconsin office was assigned the investigation.
But the FBI always gets involved when children of tender years disappear under unusual circumstances, and this was clearly one of those.
Investigators wasted no time in obtaining a search warrant for Coleman's last known address, his grandmother's house in Waukegan, Illinois, just a few miles across the state line from where the Wheats lived. A young woman answered the door. When questioned by the detective, she identified herself as Deborah Brown, Coleman's girlfriend. At first, Brown was reluctant to answer any questions about Coleman or his whereabouts. She said she had been living at the residence for a year, providing home care for Coleman's nearly blind grandmother. The investigators persisted. They finally convinced Deborah to cooperate.
Do you know his whereabouts right now?
She told them that Coleman had been gone all night, but came home alone at about 8 o'clock in the morning. He had come by to change into a suit for a court appearance later that morning. Coleman had been charged with raping a 14-year-old girl at knife point. Brown also admitted that Coleman had told her he had done something really bad the night before, but he did not explain what. Investigators waited at the house for Coleman's return while other officers canvassed the area.
Okay, do you know did he drive?
He was nowhere to be found. The FBI joined forces with local investigators. Detectives from Kenosha and nearby Waukegan, Illinois, already knew Coleman's reputation. He was a violent criminal with a disturbing past.
As I learned about Coleman, I realized he was extremely dangerous because the Waukegan Police Department had an extensive arrest record on him. He had been arrested almost 10 years previously for the rape of a 40-year-old woman, and he had a number of other arrests, mostly for assault, for molestation, rape of a child. And as you looked at these cases and you listened to the detectives who were familiar with him, you saw a picture of an increasingly violent person.
The task force enlisted every available officer and agent to help in the search for Coleman and Vernita.
Our strategy that night was to find Alton Coleman. We sat down then at the police department and assembled everything we knew. We came up with information that he a lot of times rode the train, he took taxis because he didn't have a car. What happened then is we split up into teams and went out and started interviewing people.
On the streets, investigators talked with drivers at various taxi stands. Everyone was familiar with Alton Coleman. The cabbies agreed that if they saw him, they would notify the police. The task force offered a $5,000 reward for information leading to Coleman's arrest. The promise of a reward caught people's attention, but didn't draw out any useful leads as quickly as the investigators hoped. Investigators feared that time may be running out for Vernita Wheat. On May 31st, 2 days into the investigation, a cab driver in Waukegan who knew Coleman from the neighborhood called in to report he was picking Coleman up. A squad car conducting surveillance in the area responded. Coleman was dropped off at his sister Terry's place. He saw the approaching officer and took off. He disappeared into the neighborhood he knew so well. The investigation was only 2 days old, and their suspect was within their grasp. Investigators speculated Coleman was probably hiding out in the abandoned warehouses that ran along Lake Michigan. Hoping that Coleman might respond to his sister's voice, the detective summoned her.
Waukegan Police, ma'am, please open up. I'm Detective Hansen from Luther, Antoine.
Though she was Coleman's own flesh and blood, she was also a mother of a young girl. The agents convinced her to help. Talking to her brother through a bullhorn, she pleaded with him to turn himself in.
Alton, you need to come on out and give yourself up.
Meanwhile, officers and agents fanned out and searched the area. But even in such a confined space, finding Coleman would not be easy. Lieutenant Mark Hansen of the Waukegan Police Department was the lead investigator for the task force.
This area has a lot of abandoned buildings, a lot of abandoned apartment complexes. It's heavily brushed. It was at nighttime, easy to escape in there and not be seen again. This was 1984. We didn't have helicopters with searchlights. We didn't have infrared. We didn't have the resources to fully encircle an area of that size.
The search continued through the night. But after 8 hours, it seemed their suspect and their best chance of finding 9-year-old Vernita had slipped through their fingers. Desperate to generate leads, investigators saturated the local media with details surrounding the abduction. TV and newspapers ran photographs of Vernita Wheat, asking anyone with any information to contact the task force. The news spread quickly. Investigators were flooded with sightings of Coleman from the public. Most were dead ends. But one cab driver who saw Vernita's picture on the news contacted the task force. He remembered picking up Coleman and the little girl on the night of her disappearance. He had assumed they were father and daughter. The cab driver dropped them off around midnight near a scrapyard in the industrial section of Waukegan.
That one particular night, where did you take him to?
Investigators approached the night manager at the scrapyard.
Evening. Hi. Sir, I'm Detective Hansen, Waukegan Police. Here's my card. This is Agent Showers.
He told them that he had in fact seen a man with a young girl on the night in question. He recalled that close to midnight, the two had walked hand in hand through the side gate. He couldn't really see the man's face, but he did notice that the man had an unusual rolling gait to his walk, a feature that acquaintances of Coleman had described. The night manager identified the little girl as Vernita Wheat. The sighting was enough to allow the FBI to issue a federal warrant for Alton Coleman. He had taken Vernita across state lines. It was also the last time anyone saw Vernita Wheat alive. The task force responded with another massive search.
We had about 150 FBI agents and detectives from both Kenosha and Waukegan. We did a methodical search where Coleman was last seen with Vernita. This included using dogs going through the junkyard, house-to-house and abandoned building searches, all in this downtown area, and we found nothing.
Investigators knew she was alive at midnight on the evening she disappeared. They also knew that Coleman was alone the next morning at 8 a.m. as he prepared for his court appearance.
So total there's
The question was, what happened to Vernita during that 8-hour gap?
profile from FBI headquarters in Coleman.
FBI Special Agent Jeff Showers was on the task force. He struggled to fit the pieces together.
How far is he going to travel with this girl? The girl may not even be in Waukegan. She may be in another town. But we knew that the longer that we waited, it was getting dimmer and dimmer.
Coleman and Vernita seemed to have vanished. On the night of June 19th, 3 weeks after Vernita's disappearance, investigators received a call from a man in Waukegan who was looking through an abandoned building for scrap metal to sell. On the second floor of the wrecked apartments, he made a horrifying discovery. The body of a child lay on the bathroom floor. Alton Coleman, the FBI's prime suspect in the abduction of 9-year-old Vernita Wheat from her home in Kenosha, Wisconsin, remained at large. As the hunt for Coleman intensified, a man scouring for scrap metal in an abandoned building in Waukegan, Illinois, came across the lifeless body of a young girl. The forensic team arrived at the building. Beneath a blanket, wrapped in a man's corduroy jacket, the investigators found the young girl. Her hands, feet, and neck were bound by a television cable. She was too badly decomposed to confirm her identity. But Special Agent Jeff Showers believed they had found the body of Vernita Wheat.
The clothing matched the description that we had from the mother. She was still wearing the barrettes in her hair that matched from what her mother had described her as being last known to be wearing. She was wearing the green nylon jacket. In the pocket of the jacket were carnival tickets, and we knew from an interview of her mother that the night in question, Alton Coleman had taken Vernita Wheat to a carnival.
While the investigators suspected the body was Vernita Wheat, it was up to the forensic team to prove that the remains were hers. They also needed to find evidence that could conclusively point to the killer. Starting from the location of the body, they worked their way out in concentric circles, collecting anything that looked like it could be used as evidence. Investigators swabbed walls and door frames in an effort to find prints. Figuring whoever moved the body into the room had to come in contact with the door, they removed it from its hinges and sent it to the FBI labs in Washington, D.C. Under the lab's microscopes, FBI examiners discerned a thumbprint on the door. Comparison to samples they had on file were conclusive. The thumbprint came from Alton Coleman. Examiners also compared prints taken from the little girl's hands to those lifted from Vernita Wheat's school books that had been retrieved from her home. That comparison was also positive. The search for Vernita was over. Investigators now had enough evidence to issue another warrant for Alton Coleman. This time, it was for the murder of Vernita Wheat.
We knew then that Alton Coleman was responsible for the death of this child. And now we've got not only a kidnapper, but we also have someone who's committed murder.
I know, but
While at the autopsy to determine Vernita Wheat's exact cause of death, a television news broadcast caught the attention of Agent Showers and Detective Hansen.
The first news that a little girl had been found murdered in Gary, Indiana. Agent Showers, I think, immediately thought that there could be some connection to Coleman.
The report also mentioned something that investigators found disturbing. There were 2 killers, and the second suspect was described as being a black female. Investigators immediately suspected Coleman's girlfriend, Deborah Brown, who had not been seen in weeks. If investigators were right, Alton Coleman and Deborah Brown had traveled 90 miles from their hometown neighborhood. They were on the move, and they were leaving bodies along their way. At the hospital in Gary, Indiana, local police officers questioned 9-year-old Mary James about the afternoon of June 16th. Mary told the officers that she and 7-year-old Janice Clay were walking to the store when they were approached by a man and a woman on bikes. The couple introduced themselves. They told the little girls that they had some clothes that the girls might like. To retrieve the clothes, Mary and Janice followed the couple into the woods.
How old are you? Take care of yourself. We're gonna get the man.
Mary was close to death when she managed to drag herself to the street.
I'll show you these photos.
She was able to identify Coleman, but could not identify Brown from photographs sent by the FBI. However, the girl's description matched Brown exactly. Now, investigators were dealing with 2 killers.
We had looked at Deborah Brown up until that point in time as a witness because she had cooperated with us in Waukegan. She had told us about Alton, telling her that he had done something wrong. She showed us the clothes that he had been wearing the night he had come back, when he'd been out all night and when he came back in the morning. So we had looked at her as a witness. We now knew from the investigation in Gary that she was likely assisting him.
Investigators struggled to figure out some way to predict Coleman and Brown's next move. Both murders occurred in largely black communities, communities where the two could easily blend in. And they were quick to gain people's trust.
These were street people. They had that charm. They didn't have to do any arm twisting. It was always a very easy thing with them.
Searching for anything that might help them locate and stop the killers, investigators consulted an FBI behavioral profiler. For the profiler, the escalating pattern of violence was caused by Coleman's legal problems back in Waukegan.
He saw the fact that he had taken Vernita the night before a court appearance on the rape of a 14-year-old, and that he had abducted her and then murdered her as an indication that he was responding to the stress of the court appearance, and so that he would continue to murder out of anger and stress and rage.
Investigators had reason to fear that the 2 murders were only the beginning of a ferocious crime spree. To capture a serial killer, the profiler suggested a massive national media campaign aimed at the black communities.
So we started a publicity campaign, releasing his photograph, releasing pictures of Brown to the media, press releases, everything we could to get his picture out in the forefront. Our hope was that somebody would see him and turn him in.
But the task force was always a step behind. On July 8th, agents received information from local Ohio detectives about an elderly woman named Rose Wiggins who reported her daughter missing. Rose explained that earlier in the day she had come by to check on her daughter and found the door locked. Her young grandson, James, was too frightened to open the door. The detective convinced him they were there to help. Now he had nothing to fear. Officers immediately started to search the house for the boy's missing mother. While looking, they found 3-year-old Johnny, afraid like his older brother. Meanwhile, James told the detective about the man and woman who had been at their house.
Well, they were in this house.
He showed the 8-year-old photos of the suspects, Coleman and Brown.
This is
lady, right?
James positively identified them as the couple who were there the night before.
You're absolutely sure? Okay, Raymond. How you doing? Detective Smith.
Searching the house for the boy's mother, the police found blood smeared throughout the kitchen. It led down to the basement. Not knowing who or what awaited them, the investigators followed the grisly trail. In Ohio, police responding to a missing persons call made an alarming discovery. The young son of the missing mother had identified fugitives Coleman and Brown as having been in their home. Blood stained the walls. They proceeded cautiously, not knowing if their suspects could still be lurking in the darkened basement. The trail stopped, where the bodies of mother and daughter, Virginia and Kimberly Blake, were discovered, shoved into a crawl space beneath their home.
Coleman and Brown, we didn't know where they were, and the violence connected with the murders and the crime scenes was beginning to intensify.
The officers continued their search, still believing their suspects could be somewhere in the family's home. But they seemed to have slipped away, leaving behind unmistakable evidence, clippings of jerry-curled hair. James recounted for investigators that his mother, Virginia, had met Coleman and Brown earlier in the day.
How you guys doing? Fine. Hey, we just moved to the area down the street. What's your name?
The couple stopped by the house and played with the kids.
Yeah, we like live down the street. We're just like riding around.
Virginia invited them to stay for dinner. It was just like any other summer evening in the neighborhood. Virginia cooked while the kids hung around and chatted with their new friends.
Are you going to go in a ring? You can stay.
8-year-old James saw Coleman take a knife from the counter and slip it into his back pocket.
Soup's on, guys. Soup's on.
After enjoying dinner together, Coleman, Brown, James, and his younger brother settled into the living room to watch television. At the top of the evening news, the story of a pair of killers on the loose flashed across the screen. Coleman immediately turned off the television and shuffled the boys off to bed,
Have a good night.
while Kimberly and Virginia washed the dishes. Aware of the growing media attention, Coleman realized he and Deborah needed to change their look. He found some scissors and cut off his hair. Coleman, with Brown at his side, approached the little girl and her mother. Just upstairs, James and Johnny were asleep.
What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing?
They dragged the slain woman and her daughter downstairs and stuffed them into a crawl space.
The pressure was mounting. It was becoming increasingly stressful because here we were for the 4th time catching up with him when we found more bodies.
Coleman and Brown's MO was designed to catch their victims off guard.
Okay, Raymond, nothing's gonna happen.
When someone comes up to your house on a bicycle, you figure them to be local. If they're walking, you may be a little bit suspicious. But if they're riding a bike, They're from the neighborhood. Your guard is automatically down.
News of the murdered mother and daughter horrified the community. The savage nature of the killings caused the FBI to add an 11th position on their 10 most wanted fugitives list. It was a rare occurrence. The number 11 ranking was reserved for particularly vicious killers, a description fitting Coleman and Brown.
The magnitude and the importance of it, that, you know, you've already got 10 that are bad, but here's one that's so bad, but we don't have room to put anybody else on. We're going to make an exception and put him on anyway, even though he's number 11.
With the national media spotlight focusing on the couple, it would be difficult for them to remain anonymous.
And in solving fugitive cases, finding people, there is nothing better than publicity, because all you need is the one phone call from one person saying, I saw this picture and I know it's this individual.
Phone calls poured in with more frequency and speed than ever before. Any crime that matched their suspect's MO was funneled back to the task force headquarters. Hopefully, they would be able to get one step ahead of the fugitives. Investigators were sure that Coleman and Brown would tire of a life on the run and return to familiar territory. Agents contacted everyone the two associated with in Waukegan.
We would contact them and let them know that we're still looking for them. We would go out and tell them that Alton and Deborah had been involved in another murder case, hoping that that would get them a little bit more on our side.
On July 13th, local investigators responded to a frantic 911 call from a suburb of Cincinnati, Ohio. Michelle Stone told the officers what had happened that day.
They were both young.
A couple arrived at the Stones' house earlier that morning. They told Michelle's father, Jack Stone, that they were interested in buying his camper, which was for sale in the driveway. Jack's wife, Anna, joined them on the porch. As Jack and Anna chatted with them, Michelle left for work.
I won't be long. I'll see you guys later. You'll be home for dinner? Yeah, I will. All right.
Be careful, Mom.
Bye-bye. All I remember, I didn't really see them.
When she arrived home later that day, Michelle noticed the bikes the couple had arrived on were still in the yard. And her father's car was missing.
Mom?
Inside, she found her parents' home had been vandalized.
Mom?
She had called out to her mother and father. Hearing no response, her mind began to race as she stepped through the shattered glass and overturned furniture littering the room.
Dad? Mom? Dad?
As she called 911, Michelle could hear a weak voice calling out from another room. Next to the basement door, she noticed a bloody palm print.
Dad? Dad, are you here?
She walked down into the dimly lit room, not knowing what or who she might find. Lying next to each other, motionless on the floor, she discovered her parents. Her father, Jack, was barely alive. As she reached to take her mother's pulse, she lifted the sheet. Her mother, Anna, was dead. Michelle waited by her father's side for help to arrive.
My mom had a sheet over her body.
Her parents had been bludgeoned and bound. Michelle's description of the couple that had stopped by her parents' house earlier that day matched the fugitives, Coleman and Brown. A forensic team went to work collecting evidence. Among the items was a pair of plastic shoes next to Anna Stone. A recent sighting of the suspects included a description of Brown wearing these same shoes. Crime scene technicians also retrieved other bloodied tools found around the body. Later, forensics confirmed the crowbar was used to kill Mrs. Stone. Coleman's prints were all over it. He made no attempt to conceal his crimes. But there was nothing to suggest where the couple had gone.
It was all dead ends. Every time we'd find a body, they were gone. You don't have anything as to which way they're going. You have no indicators as to who their next victim's going to be. Depends. If they wanted sexual gratification, they may snatch a child. If they need a vehicle, they may snatch an adult. Just don't know. We've got a couple of mad dogs out there.
The crime against the Stones showed the couple was able to gain the trust of people from outside the black urban centers where they had found their first 4 victims. This realization only complicated the investigation. Coleman could fit in anywhere.
Or they would come up on a bicycle and start chatting, and he would be looking to play in a card game. Or sometimes they would respond, they wanted to buy something, or they had something for sale. He was an extremely glib person, a real con man, and people trusted him. Plus he was traveling with a woman, and so people were not nearly as suspect of him as they should have been.
Though Coleman's rage continued to intensify, his ability to charm more victims remained consistent, and he was showing no signs of growing tired of the kill. A month and a half had passed since Alton Coleman and Deborah Brown embarked on a killing spree that had left 5 victims dead. In Cincinnati, Coleman bludgeoned a husband and wife, leaving the wife dead and the husband barely clinging to life. Their car was missing. An APB was immediately put out on the vehicle. Two days later, a farm worker discovered the abandoned car on his property in Lexington, Kentucky, 105 miles away from the crime in Cincinnati. In less than 2 days, the fugitives had traveled hundreds of miles across 2 states. The FBI media blitz was leaving them with few places to hide. But the couple appeared to be heading further away from their home in Illinois, not closer, as investigators had hoped.
When you're talking about Alton Coleman and Deborah Brown, they are not a normal killing machine. A normal killing machine is going to be one person. We've now got 2 out there. They're working together. They're feeding off each other, and one's giving support. Those are the problems. We couldn't separate them. We couldn't talk to one. We couldn't talk to either one of them.
Knowing Coleman would eventually need to steal a car, the FBI saturated the Lexington, Kentucky area. They did not have to wait long for signs that he was still in town. In a hotel parking lot, Professor Oline Carmichael was assaulted and his car stolen. A couple forced him to hand over his cash and car keys. Leaving the professor wounded but still alive, they sped away. After receiving medical attention, police asked Carmichael to look at mugshots that included the FBI's Most Wanted Fugitives. Without hesitating, he pointed to Coleman and Brown.
That's her, without a doubt. Those are the two.
The FBI were now only a few hours behind the fugitives. An APB was issued for Carmichael's car. In a matter of hours, they received a response. It came from police in an Ohio town close to the Kentucky border. The professor's car was found, abandoned behind some vacant buildings. Coleman and Brown, however, were nowhere in sight. For the experienced agents, finding the car in Ohio meant Coleman and Brown were probably on their way home.
Gut instinct is going to tell you that he's going to come back home. He may not come back to Waukegan, but he's going to come back to some place that he feels comfortable with. He'd never been to Gary, Indiana. He'd never been to Detroit. He had never been to Toledo. Had never been to Cincinnati, Dayton, Ohio, Lexington, Kentucky. At some point, he's going to get tired and he's going to want to get back to comfort. Some place that he feels comfortable. He knows the streets. He knows the people. He's going to feel comfortable. He's coming back.
The FBI immediately set up a dragnet. Agents and police officers from across several states joined forces to track Coleman and Brown as they headed home to Illinois. Reports of stolen vehicles or assaults were to be given immediate attention. An officer in Dayton, Ohio, responded to a report involving an assault and a stolen car. The call came from an elderly couple, Reverend and Mrs. Gay. Reverend Gay had been badly beaten. Mrs. Gay told the officer that a young couple who they had met weeks earlier broke into their house. After beating them, the attackers demanded the keys to their station wagon. According to the description, the attackers were Coleman and Brown. New leads were coming in at a furious pace. Coleman and Brown were still just out of reach. But the FBI was starting to close the gap. The day after the attack in Ohio, detectives involved in the FBI's dragnet discovered a station wagon that had been abandoned near a car wash in Indiana. It belonged to Reverend Gay. Later in the day, some road crew workers on the edge of Interstate 65 outside of Zionsville, Indiana, made a gruesome discovery. It was the body of an elderly man who had been reported missing from his home in Indiana. He was found on his 77th birthday. Evidence left at the scene was unmistakable. Coleman and Brown had claimed another life. The body was found less than 20 miles from the couple's home turf. The country's most wanted fugitives had come home, and the FBI was waiting for them. For 7 weeks, Coleman and Brown assaulted and killed victims in 6 different states. While investigators worked the crime scenes, scores of local officers and agents organized a dragnet to trap them as they headed back home to Illinois. The aggressive media campaign was having an impact. On July 20th, in Evanston, Illinois, a man spotted Alton Coleman with Deborah Brown in Mason Park. While he waited with the car running, his friend called the police. It was the one phone call investigators had been hoping for.
He went to school with Alton Coleman. He knew without a shadow of a doubt that the man that crossed the street in front of him was Alton Coleman.
Evanston police responded. Only a couple of yards stood between the law and Coleman and Brown. With surprising ease, they were able to corner Coleman. He insisted they had the wrong man. A second pair of officers surrounded Brown. When asked, she gave a different pair of names for herself and Coleman.
What's your name?
Trina Williams.
Having found a knife and a false identification, the officers brought Alton Coleman to the police station.
4 other units be advised when you pick up the female, she might have a weapon in her purse. Make sure you check it. She's 10-0.
A search of Brown's handbag uncovered a .38 caliber pistol.
523-607. Meet us over here. We got
The weapon was all they needed to handcuff her and take her in.
Anything we need to know about? No?
2 of the FBI's most wanted were apprehended without incident. After nearly 2 months, the violent rampage was over. Coleman continued to insist he hadn't been in any of the places where the murders happened. But the forensic evidence collected over the past 7 weeks proved otherwise. Alton Coleman was charged with the federal crime of kidnapping Vernita Wheat, followed by murder charges in 3 other states. Deborah Brown was also charged for her role in the murders. As investigators from the task force looked on, a strip search uncovered a bloody steak knife. It would be linked to yet another murder, a 15-year-old Ohio girl, Alice Myers. Illinois State's Attorney Matthew Chansey was given the task of prosecuting Alton Coleman. In his mind, the motive was simple.
With Vernita Wheat, he crossed a threshold, and once he crossed that threshold, it was easy for him, and I think that he enjoyed it. And it wasn't just easy anymore; it was something he liked. He liked doing, and so he looked for every opportunity he could to repeat that.
Together, Coleman and Brown had stolen 7 lives. 3 states sought to take theirs. Brown stood trial separately. She was sentenced to life in prison. Until the end, she was committed to Coleman.
At Coleman's sentencing hearing for that murder, she testified on his behalf that she had committed the murder and he had not, in an obvious attempt to try to save him. It didn't work.
Coleman and Brown's rampage had covered over 1,300 miles in 6 states. For Special Agent Berdina Passanelli, the intensity of the FBI's hunt prevented more needless murders.
Because of the massive investigation that we did and the publicity that we did, that he was caught within 7 weeks of when he started. Had we not done that, had we not gotten on this right away, who knows how long he would have gone on killing people.
In the end, Alton Coleman was sentenced to death 4 times. He went to prison in Ohio, where he was executed on April 26, 2002.